Hello, everyone. Apologies for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties with our translation. Hopefully, it's all properly up and running now, and you can see uh, me and my screen. Um, Looks like we still have a bit of a delay, so we are fully up and running, which is great to hear. Let me turn off YouTube in the background here, at least mute my computer. Welcome to the third lecture of the public speaking course. Um, Today we're going to be talking about preparing for your speech and outlining your speech, which is basically the beginning of your speech, how to set the expectations for your audience in terms of what to expect from your speech, um, and basically laying out for them a roadmap for how the speech is going to go. So, thank you for attending. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them during the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. So let's get started. Again, I apologize for being a little bit late today. So let's review. Um, there are three main aspects that we talked about last week regarding volume, pitch, and tempo. Those were variety, clarity, and volume, with variety being probably the most important of the three. They're approximately equally important, but the variety is the biggest thing that you want to focus on, especially when just starting out. Any monotonous speeches, as we talked about last time, are the worst kind of speeches that you can give, as they evoke no emotion from your audience. Next, talking about volume. Volume is not like a remote control for your television. You want to project your voice. Um, More breath, the further your voice will go. Again, we don't want to lose our tonal quality. We don't want to lose our ability to control our voice. When we do that, that's when we've either gone too high or too low in terms of volume, pitch, or tempo. So remember, it's not shouting, it's just using the muscles of your chest, your diaphragm, to expel more air as you speak, which is what will make your voice sound louder while maintaining control over how you sound. So, what words are said conveys the meaning of the speech. How words are said convey the emotions and feelings that we want associated with our speech. You want to cultivate a deeper tone of voice. Remember, we talked about um, high pitched voices sound like squealing. They don't convey the same sense of authority and confidence that traditionally lower, deeper tones, deeper pitches will evoke. We want to use a pitch range, as you see from the chart that's on the screen, that is comfortable for our natural conversation. Giving a presentation, giving a public speech, we want to be able to use the same range that we would use in a conversation at the restaurant with a group of our friends. When you speak to, let's say, five, six people that you're very comfortable with out at a large restaurant, you want to use the same comfortable tones, the same pitch range that you use with your friends when you're giving a public speech. Next, slow down. There's no need to speak really quickly. Remember, you're on stage for a reason. You're an expert. You're there because people want you to be there. And it's very important to remember that. Speaking fast does not convey confidence in yourself or the subject. Speaking slow tells people that you have important things to say and that it would serve them well for them to dedicate the time and effort necessary to listen to and understand what you're saying. Speaking very fast conveys the opposite. We talked about pauses and how important they are. Um, so you pause when with the things that you want your audience to remember the most. So that's when you hit your pauses, either before or after. Before, to let your audience know that something important is coming. After, to let your audience know that you just finished them telling something very important. Pauses are also ideal for fillers, to substitute for fillers, such as and, so, or Again, they'll never be completely eliminated. It's just the natural way of speaking. But a pause is a nice substitute to help you begin to minimize those filler words and sounds. So, what are we going to talk about today? Today, we're going to be talking about preparing for your speech. So, before you ever step foot in an auditorium, um, outlining your speech, which is basically the beginning of your speech, what an introduction should accomplish, and we're going to talk a little bit about primacy and recency, and how those impact public speaking. So, outlining your speech lays out the roadmap, similar to the picture that I have up on the screen. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll try and be done by 3 o'clock, as is our normal schedule. Even though we started late. Again, feel free if you have questions, please ask them. I'll be happy to answer them. So, preparing for your speech. This is a month before, 2 weeks before, 3 days before, the night before you ever step foot in your auditorium. Could even be when you're in the auditorium. Um, Perhaps there's a change of venue at the last minute and you go from one type of room to another. Perhaps you were anticipating having a microphone and all of a sudden there's no microphone. Perhaps somebody forgot some important piece of material and then you have to prepare and make last minute changes. But the first thing that we're going to talk about is preparing for your speech. How to make sure that you're ready to give a speech prior to stepping foot on stage in front of a group of people. First, one thing to remember. I've talked about it before. I'll talk about it many, many times more. Great speeches are emotional, not logical. The best public speakers evoke emotion. Evoking emotion is the most important thing. It can be any emotion. It can be sadness. It can be anger. It can be frustration. It can be happiness. It could be fondness. Whatever it is, the great speeches all evoke emotion. And not just one particular type of emotion. The more emotion that you can, I don't want to say that, but you want to evoke more than just one type of emotion if you can. But again, know the emotion that you're trying to evoke when you're giving your speech. Again, it's not a logical sort of argument that you're making. You'll, of course, include facts. You'll, of course, include your research. It's not just make it up as you go along. But at the same time, your primary responsibility as a public speaker is to evoke emotion. Small shifts in tone make an enormous difference to the audience. Sweat the details. Worry about these things. When you're practicing your speech, always practice your speeches. You should be practicing with different conveyances, different ways of conveying information, different pause types, different different tones, pitches, tempos, volumes, practicing those dramatic shifts that we talked about a little bit last time. A great speech has a clear voice speaking throughout. A great speech conveys one idea only, though it can have lots of supporting points. You want to determine, what is my overall idea? What is the goal of my presentation? It could be one presentation, it could be several presentations. For example, my goal in this series, this distance course, is to get people comfortable with public speaking. I'll have lots of different topics, lots of different lectures, lots of different things that we discuss. But my overall goal is to get my audience, hopefully all of you who are watching and the many people who have watched the presentations later on, to get you comfortable with public speaking and to take away some of the um, mythology around it, the aura of public speaking, to where it's so difficult and only certain people are able to do it and everyone else is not. Again, to convey that it's a skill set, that it's something you learn, work on, and develop over time. And then a great speech answers a great need. I worked on developing this with UNDP because they said a lot of people who work with us may have issues with public speaking. It's also a skill set that's developed differently in different parts of the world in terms of what that skill set is and how it could best be conveyed to a lot of people. Um, and it's a skill sorely lacking in many different spheres. So that is the need that this distance course, this series of webinars, seeks to answer, seeks to work on, is the need for people to understand how to speak publicly. So to break it down for you, there are 10 steps to writing a great speech. Again, none of this is concrete, none of it's written in stone, none of it's unchangeable, but here are 10 steps that you can follow in order to write a great speech. And we'll go through each of them in detail. We'll go through each of them because time is somewhat limited, but we'll go through each of them as we continue with the presentation. So first step, most important, can't stress it enough. Who is your audience? Who are you speaking to? There's a big difference in speaking to a group of retirees and a group of college students, very ages, etc. We'll get into it. Determine your purpose and your message. Brainstorming, categorizing, grabbing people's attention. So setting up what's going to grab people's attention. Your introduction, the body of your speech, your conclusion, questions, and then practicing. Practice makes perfect. So let's start. Who's your audience? Age is the most important factor. That's the thing that's going to be most important when you're preparing your speech. What age group am I giving this to? Uh, there are lots of different things that separate people in terms of consideration when giving a public speech. Gender, history, are they professionals, are they amateurs? Um, you don't want to give an overly complex speech to people who are new to a process. There's race, religion, sexual orientation, any number of different things that you need to consider when conveying your speech. Age is the most important. There are certain events that are shared across all of the other fields, race, religion, etc. Events that have happened that shaped the world, and different age groups relate to that. And so understanding the age of your audience, it could be mixed, but you need to understand that as well. Age is critically important, but knowing who you're going to give your speech to. Am I giving this public speaking class to professionals from, for example, UNDP? Am I giving this presentation to university students? Am I giving this presentation to university professors? Um, Very different aspects that you want to take into consideration. And it is the first step. Next, determining your purpose and your message. What is the purpose? Why are you there? What message do you want to get across, right? Why have you been asked to speak in the first place? You may have been asked to speak because the person who was originally going to give the presentation got food poisoning last night and they asked you to fill in. Well, that's not typically a good reason to tell an audience. So you need to determine what's the purpose. Why are you giving this speech? What's the overall goal? How will this benefit people? And then What do you want? What do you most want audiences to come away with after hearing you? Right? For me, and this distance course, it's the comfort level of my attendees in public speaking, that all of you feel more comfortable giving public speeches. And that again, I've given you the tools necessary for you to feel comfortable developing public speeches. And then to give you the tools necessary to go out and do it. Again, I don't want for you to walk away with the idea of I'm going to follow these steps and automatically all of the time give a great speech. This is a learned skill set. It requires multiple practice sessions, not just practice sessions, but giving hundreds of speeches, 50, 100, 200, 400, giving lots and lots and lots of speeches, and always looking for ways to improve yourself. Next, brainstorming. You may not know the purpose or the message of your presentation right off the bat. And brainstorming can be done in tons and tons and tons of different ways. Um, I remember at university, my professor had me mind map um, Pakistan. I was writing a paper on the nuclear situation when it relates to Pakistan and their nuclear program. It was horrifying as I was gathering more information. My mind map got huge with all of these different aspects to try and understand the situation in Pakistan as it existed in 2012. But I couldn't figure out how to write the paper until I laid it all out, until I brainstormed everything that I wanted to talk about, and then patterns formed. And that helped me develop the way to write a paper that ultimately I got an A on, or a 5 in Ukrainian. Um, Write them all out. Get them all out of your head. Get everything on paper. Once you get all of your ideas on paper, then you'll be able to organize them. But brainstorming will really help you develop the structure and the process of your speech and what you want your audience to come away with. Categorize, right? You've written all of your ideas, you're brainstorming onto paper, right? You've got a list of 100 things. As you read through it, you're going to come across a lot of things that are related to one another. And then what you're going to do is categorize them. So you may break down your 100 different things into 5 or 6 different categories. And you're going to take those categories, determine which ones you really want to talk about because you want to stick to an overall message. And you've basically written yourself an outline for your speech, right? Because you know all of the things that you want to cover. You can organize them into even smaller groups within the category um, and really create a proper flow for your speech. Next, an attention grabber. So your audience, right, will not be feeling any of the anxiety that you are likely to feel. It's stressful doing public speaking. Absolutely. I remember. I still get it. But you have to remember that your audience isn't feeling the anxiety that you're feeling, right? You, as the public speaker, need to overcome that anxiety, right? The first thing that you want to do is you want to say, look at all of my material and just start dumping information on people. Data dumping right off the bat because that's the stuff you know and you want to get past your nerves. Don't do that. Don't launch right into your material. The audience needs time to settle in and get comfortable. And an introduction is super important, which we'll get to next and then later on this presentation. Use an anecdote, a joke, or a question that will accomplish really 2 things. You tell it for your first story. One, it allows you to get past some of that anxiety that you feel standing up in front of the audience. 2, it allows the audience time to settle in and focus. Um, you want to give them a chance to understand that the presentation has really started. And as anybody who's listened to a presentation or gone to a class will tell you, you're not necessarily paying the most attention right at the beginning. For a public speaker, it's critically important that first 30 seconds But for an audience, they're settling in, they're getting comfortable, they're judging everything that's happening. There's a lot that's going on, but allowing yourself to engage your audience and evoke that first feeling that you want the audience to gain from your speech is very important. Next, we're going to move on to the introduction. The introduction of your speech lets the audience know what to expect, right? Is this going to be a fun speech? Is this going to be a boring speech? Is this going to be a speech that's going to make me laugh? Is this going to be a speech that makes me cry? Again, not one is not better than the other. It depends on the emotion that you're trying to evoke. Um, the other thing that you want to do in an introduction is lay out your roadmap. Um, The reason to do that is you want your audience to understand there's a process. It's not going to be me sitting up here speaking and just talking on and on and on and on and on until the end of time. They have an understanding of, okay, well, first there's this. Okay, so I'm 1/4 of the way through, I'm half the way through, I'm 3/4 of the way through. Now I'm done. Could be fifths, could be thirds, could be halves, whatever it is. Experts suggest that between 3 and 4 topics are advisable, followed by your conclusion. If you've got more than that, you're overloading your audience with information and they won't be getting out of it what you want them to be getting out of it. So don't overcomplicate your speech. Next, the body. Think about creating each section like its own mini paper, mini assignment, mini speech with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion for each section. Um, each chunk of your speech will then become significantly more organized. You've got your whole, you've got your total, but you've got your various sections within your total that you treat as their own separate entity. And when you do that, they're more organized, the audience understands what's happening, and they can keep track of those signposts, those goalposts, as you move along in your speech. Every section does not need to be equal. For example, recency and primacy, the last section I'll talk about here, is not going to be very long. It's just something important that I want you to hear. This preparation, when you're writing your speech, this is a much longer portion of my presentation than recency and primacy will be. And you'll see that. They don't all need to be equal. They don't all need to be exactly the same. Spend time deciding and writing the ones that are most important. This is very important. Preparing for your speech is very important. Introducing your speech is very important. Recency and primacy, it's important, but not nearly as important as writing your speech, as preparation and as the introduction. So I'm dedicating most of the time that we have today to these topics, right? Next, conclusion. If you say finally or in conclusion, be prepared to end the speech quickly. People summon at the end of a speech, they summon their last bit of will, their last bit of focus that they've given you throughout your speech, and they focus in and bear down for the end of your speech. If you've forgotten things earlier in the speech, don't then dump them into the conclusion because then you'll lose people. And we'll talk about conclusions later on. But the conclusion of your speech is, again, like the introduction, of critical importance. It's your call to action. It's your demand that the audience do something at the end of your speech. Um, Questions. Make sure that you allow enough time for your audience to ask questions. I have the chats up here. Anybody who's interested can ask questions whenever they want. Um, you always want to leave time for questions. Um, that way you can avoid having to jam tons of information into your speech. You may assume that your audience will ask certain questions. And if they do, then you get to answer them without cluttering up your speech with other stuff. It also helps avoid, oh, and another thing I forgot to mention, oops, plus there's this, etc. Doing that is a sign of being unprepared, and your audience will lose focus again because when they when they slog down for the conclusion, when they summon that last bit of concentration, they expect it to be the end. And if you then stretch your conclusion on, they will again lose focus. And it's not a good, it's the recency, it's the end of the speech. Really important. Finally, practice. Don't be too proud. I've seen many people who get started in public speaking and they don't really want to practice. If they do want to practice, they don't want to practice out loud. They want to practice in their head. They don't want to practice in front of other people. They want to practice only alone. Practicing alone is better than not practicing at all. But don't be too proud. If you're just starting out in public speaking, practice out loud. Practice in front of people. Kidnap your friends. Sit them down and say, you're going to listen to my speech because I need to practice it. Do the same with your coworkers. Now, don't actually kidnap somebody, but sit them down and say, I need your help. I need you to sit and listen to my speech. Practice, 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 practice. You practice your volume, your pitch, your tempo. You practice your movement. You practice interacting with your materials. Say, for example, slides. Um, let's say a cup that you want to demonstrate to everybody. Look, Peace Corps, yay, right? But you want to understand and how to use all of that. You want to make sure that you are comfortable interacting with everything. And you also want to know you can dabble and practice with various types of pauses. Should I pause here? Should I pause here? Which one has a better effect? How's my volume? Is it changing or am I being monotonous? Practice will expose all of that to you. Some other things to consider. Notes. Take notes. Bring notes with you. Notes can be any way that you like. I'll show you some examples on the next slide. They don't need to be clean and neat. They don't need to be super duper organized. One thing they should not be is a verbatim of your entire speech. That is not a good thing. There's a professor I had in university who, it was not a professor, excuse me, it was his TA, had his entire presentation verbatim that he brought with him. And he was giving his presentation and the class ended. And at the end, he put a little dash right on the piece of paper to show where he had stopped. And we showed up for the next class and we sat down and he started reading right from the point where he stopped the last class. And everyone was like, huh? What's going on? Don't have your entire speech verbatim. Your notes should provide you with an outline and the main points. For me, I like to use my presentation as my notes, especially when I'm doing a webinar and I can look at it on the screen in front of me. I know the stories I want to tell. I know how they relate to one another, and I've written the speech to facilitate that for me. Next, understanding your space. Show up a little early. Walk the room. Are you in a small room? Are you in a big room? Is it stadium style seating? Is it row style seating? Are people likely to turn and talk to one another? Understanding the room. Do you have a microphone? Do you have a podium? It's very different to give a speech if you have a podium and you don't. We'll talk about podiums when we talk about movement. But do you have those things in the room? Again, stage size. Don't fall off the stage because you forget how big the stage is. Walk up and down the stage, up and down the room. It will give you a sense of comfort with the space, at the same time giving you an understanding of what your audience will be experiencing. Okay? Notes. As you can see, notes do not have to be one standard way. Many public speakers, as you can see from the pictures, have very, very large words on their sheets of paper. I didn't read what's on here, so but as you can see, some of the notes are clean, no notes, no writing. Some of the notes have handwriting on them because somebody was making changes. Some of the notes are completely handwritten and using symbols and pictures. There's no one way to do it. Whatever works best for you. Some people take notes through pictures, and that's fine. There's no issue with that. If that's what helps you remember to recall the stories that you want to tell, by all means do that. Notes can be however you want them to be. Uh, Normally, you would keep them for yourself. You can destroy them, you can use them again and again. Take notes, have notes ready for yourself. Okay? Next, does anybody have any questions? If you have questions, please, by all means, ask them and I'll be happy to answer. Um, so, let me give you a second as the stream catches up to me, since I asked if you have any questions. So um, let's jump now into outlining your speech, since I haven't seen any questions yet. Um, so we talked about preparing for your speech. Now we're talking about outlining your speech, which is the beginning of your speech to your audience. How to begin. This is your time to shine. So shine right from the very beginning. Don't be afraid to be your best right off the bat. Start your speech with power, something unique, engaging, and memorable. Is it a provocative question? A closed question? As the public speaker, you control the room. If you want your audience engaged, then you can engage your audience and have them give you questions back and forth. Best not to start that way. You want to maintain control, especially in the beginning. The worst thing that can happen is to ask an open ended question and have it turn into 100 people arguing. It's no. Ask a yes or no question just to get your audience engaged, right? Something provocative. An amazing or a shocking fact, a joke, evoking an image, telling a story that the audience can relate to. We had our technical issues today, so that was what I talked about in the beginning, right? Telling a story. I'm sure everyone's had issues with their tech not working quite right. Make sure that it's something that you're 100% comfortable with, something that you've practiced, something that you know how to say. It's a great way to start when you first start public speaking. When you're comfortable with it, or you're really good at thinking of things on the fly, then by all means roll with it and see how it works out for you. But if you're not overly comfortable with public speaking, have a canned set of stories. Comedians, many will start their shows with a specific set of jokes. Let's say 5 jokes. They see which ones the audience uh, reacts to, and those are the kind of jokes they tell for the rest of for the rest of their comedy show. But they've practiced those. They've told them repeatedly over and over and over. It's second nature to them. Okay, so it should be the same with you. Okay, remember something that you're very comfortable with, something that you've told 150,000 times, so that you're comfortable saying it. That way, you show that confidence right off the bat, and your audience rolls along with you. So, avoid starting a speech with these 4 lines, right? Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Everyone will go, yes, I'm sure it's a pleasure to be here giving us a speech. Ugh. I'm sorry, this isn't going to take very long. Why would you be apologizing? They're there to listen to your presentation and your information. You also don't have to tell them this won't take very long. Um, you may be tempted to do that, knowing that, let's say you're giving a presentation and people have lunch coming up. Acknowledging that is not a bad thing. Hello, everyone. I know lunch is right after my presentation, so don't worry. I know that. I'm keeping that in mind. It is not the best way to start, but adding that information just after you started, that's showing people that you understand. Next, I was only asked last week, yesterday, 10 minutes ago to do this speech. Why would you do that? Don't start that way. It makes you seem like the last person that they had in their mind to give that speech. Yeah, they'd asked like 10 people before me to give this speech, but this guy was in Denver this lady was sick, this guy's wife's giving birth, da, 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 da. Why would you lower yourself down the totem pole? I was asked to give this speech, right? I'm an expert. I'm giving you the information that you want to hear. Don't diminish yourself. You want to Your credibility is on the line, especially right in the very beginning. So why would you make yourself less credible for no reason? And then a funny thing happened to me while trying to find the venue. It's corny, it's overused. Many people like to do it. It's like starting a book with, "It was a cold, stormy night." Okay, I haven't heard that one before. So avoid these kind of generic things or anything that doesn't make you look good. If it's something that doesn't make you look good, just drop it, forget about it. I was only asked to do this yesterday. I'm only filling in for somebody else. That makes you look weak. Don't do that. So, what should an introduction accomplish? An introduction should get your audience's attention. It helps involve audience members in the presentation at the outset. Okay, so it engages your audience right off the bat. This is hard to do over the internet because I can't look at you directly in the face and ask an individual person a question. But I do what I can to get you engaged with this presentation right off the bat. If you don't engage, then your audience has to engage themselves, and that may take them extra time. If you don't engage your audience, they may take extra time trying to catch up to what you're talking about. That's part of why I do the review. It's hard to engage over the internet. Again, I can't get reaction from you except through the live chat window. So that's why I start with the review. You can go on the YouTube page and watch last week's speech, but I start with the review to make sure that you've got a little bit of extra time um, to focus, to settle in, and to get comfortable. That being said, try to pay attention the whole time. That would be great. Thank you. An introduction discloses the purpose. What problem will the presentation help them solve? This is helping you prepare to write a speech. So, writing a speech, preparing for your speech, and then outlining or beginning your speech. What question will the presentation answer? What issue will the presentation help them deal with more effectively? Right? Here, you'll give a better speech. Right? You'll understand how to prepare for your speech, so you'll be more confident when you stand up to start. Why does the presentation matter to them? Well, it matters to you because you're here. You want to improve your public speaking, and so you're taking part in this web series, or you're watching the video through our page. Um, Letting the audience this lets the audience know that you're prepared and that you've prepared for them something really useful. This isn't just a fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. You've thought this through. You're giving them information that they need. Okay. Next, what do? You establish the credibility of the speaker. Okay. You're there to give a speech. You have instant credibility. Don't waste it. Build on it. Right. I was asked to give this speech last week. Waste the credibility that you automatically have just being the speaker. What is the speaker's underlying motive for giving the presentation? I've already talked about this a couple of times. Do I trust the speaker? Hopefully all of you trust me. You're here watching the presentation, so hopefully you trust me to provide you with interesting information. And then provide the basics. What's your name? The organization or the interest that you represent. You don't really want to hide that. If you do and people find out later, it destroys your credibility going forward. What qualifies you to speak about the subject? When I did my introductory lesson, I talked about how much experience I have with public speaking. I've taught this course before, giving myself the credibility that I have thanks to my experience. And why are you giving the presentation? Okay, I'm giving the presentation to help people with their public speaking. UNDP approached me to provide a public speaking series for them and for other people who are interested in our electronic laboratory portal. It's something that Ukrainians might find useful. It's something that's been requested by numerous groups. Whatever it is, it's important to explain why you're giving the why are you there? Why would you want to do this as the speaker? Next, establish rapport. Just like making a friend, you want to establish a mutual good feeling between you and your audience. Um, this is why age is so important, because you want to touch on those shared experiences. Individual groups will have their own individual reactions to different topics, but everyone in the same age bracket will have experienced certain global events or national events um, that impact the way that they look at the world. And when you talk about that, you engage that rapport, you share that experience with them, or you understand how that experience made them feel. Um, Try and find an area of agreement. If you walk into an audience of Boston Red Sox fans, it's probably not a good idea to go, remember how great it was when the Yankees did that? They'll be like, not so much, right? Know the area, know who your audience is, so that you can find an area of agreement with them. That's something that they automatically relate to. That they go, yeah, you know what? I know that. That guy's definitely right. Providing the speech's roadmap, right? Develop your presentation around a logical structure and then share that structure with the audience, right? What we talked about today, we'll be covering area 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you know where I am in my presentation and you know how to track where you are. So you know how much information you want to, I'll be giving. And you know, okay, Eric is now close to the end of his presentation. He's at the third part of our topics, right? Same thing for any audience that you're giving your presentation to. It doesn't have to be the way I did it. It can be done in any number of different ways. But providing your audience with a roadmap, with an understanding of how to get from A to B, and what the stops are going to be along the way, helps them settle in. Our last topic, and I'm going to be pretty close to 5, which is good because I don't want to keep people later than our originally scheduled time. So the final is primacy and recency. And you can see from the graph, it's where people retain the most information because it's when people are typically the most engaged. At the beginning and at the end. Okay? Primacy. Primacy states that people remember most vividly what they hear at the beginning of a speech, your introduction. Right? Recency says those same people will strongly recall what you say at the end. In the States, we have the saying, all's well that ends well. Right? Recency. People most remember the very beginning and the very end. The stuff in the middle, that's the meat, that's the data, that's the info. But people will most take away from the beginning and from the end, so much more than they take away from the middle. So if you really want to make sure that you're nailing 2 areas, it's the introduction and the conclusion, because of primacy and because of recency. You come in and you're most engaged right at the beginning. You haven't spent any of your mental capacity yet because you're walking in for the first time. And you're like, okay, I'm ready, 100%. And then you reach the conclusion and you're like, oh, I made it to the end. I'm almost done. Now, I'm going to summon the rest of my information and really buckle down and remember what's being said now. Primacy and recency. Your introduction really needs to be engaging and interesting, right? One, because of primacy, right? Your audience will make value judgments about you, your organization, and your message in the first 30 to 60 seconds of your presentation. Remember, that's emotional response. This is why you tell stories that relate to your audience. You evoke that initial positive response right off the bat because your audience responds to that. Your audience brings that in. And it's in that first 30 to 60 seconds you must establish that positive rapport, that positive interaction between yourself and your audience. If you don't, it's almost impossible to change an audience's opinion. If you've lost your audience in the first 60 seconds, you're unlikely to get them back in your speech. It's possible, it's incredibly difficult. So you engage with your audience. It comes from preparation, it comes from knowing your audience and knowing your space, and making sure that your speech is designed to grab them right at the beginning, because you have 30 to 60 seconds to impress your audience. It's much easier to get them than it is to get them back. Okay. Number two, your opening sets the entire tone of your presentation. Are you going to be interesting? Are you not going to be interesting? Are you going to be engaging? Are you not going to be engaging? All of that becomes incredibly clear right off the bat. And people remember the first things that you said. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. That first impression is hugely important. And then, finally, from a more logistical standpoint, the first minute is when you introduce your message and tell the audience why they need to hear it. If you don't tell the audience why you're there, and you don't tell the audience why they should care about what you're talking about, they're not going to care about what you're talking about. They're going to be there because they're there. And most people have the social etiquette to know that I don't just walk out of the presentation, I stay all the way till the end. The first 30 to 60 seconds are critical to keeping your audience. So that's it. We went about 40 something minutes today. I wanted to keep us close to 5 o'clock to 3 o'clock, excuse me, our scheduled end time. I hope you got out of this the importance of introductions and preparing for your speech. I hope this gave you the tools and background information that you need to properly prepare for your speech. Let me pause now, see if anybody has any questions that I can answer before logging off. Just checking on my screen over here for any questions. So doesn't look like I have any questions. I hope all of you enjoyed the presentation. Hopefully I will see you all on Tuesday for our next presentation. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will see all of you next time.